on, Bob. Come back. No, you're stuck.
Politics and politicians can look a little silly on occasions, but when MPs Bob Katter and Andrew Wilkie took to the press gallery corridor this morning, they may have looked silly, but been right on point about the issue on voters' minds just now.
Both sides are on the gravy train, snouts in the trough. Not another country in the world has anything like the concentration, where you've got, 90% of the market held by the big two.
The farmers being screwed. Certainly the consumers are being screwed. These supermarkets, they have a thumping big monopoly, and they use that monopoly and that power from their monopoly to charge whatever they want.
Politicians are never popular, and the levels of trust around politicians are never great, and the level of engagement with politicians is never great. But at the moment, supermarkets really matter to people because this cost of living thing really matters to people.
And that's part of the problem for the Albanese government and the opportunity for the Dutton opposition just now. Voters are in a world of pain. The cost of living is something they feel personally, unlike national security or culture wars issues. It is not particularly even seen through a political prism. It is supermarkets that are primarily in the firing line. The government isn't directly blamed for prices going up, but the perceptions of the way it is governing is seen through this very personal fog of financial pain.
All the indicators we get show that people think the economy is worse than it's ever been, worse than it's been in the last 15 years. And the reason for that is it's personal this time. It's not about macroeconomic indicators. It's about their own personal hip pocket. And the government's really in a position where they're riding that. So if things go bad, the natural response of people, of voters, is to blame it on the government, or to at least not feel good about the government.
A million miles from the frame of voter pain is a political conversation conducted by politicians and the media. The price of living might be at its heart, but it has a different psychological location, this Saturday's Dunkley by-election, and different moving parts, most notably the modified tax cuts which were passed by the Parliament last night.
The Coalition is committed to going to the next election with a tax reform package that is fully costed and is in keeping with the Stage 3 tax reforms.
84% of taxpayers, they'll be getting a bigger income tax cut than they would have under the former government and paying less tax.
Good evening, and thanks for joining us at this unusual time for a media conference. But Labor's cost of living tax cuts have just passed the Parliament. This is a huge win for all 13.6 million Australian taxpayers.
In politics world, the debate about the tax cuts has gone through several iterations. The decision was overwhelmingly seen first in terms of the politics of breaking a promise not to change the tax cuts. So changing the tax cuts would be bad politics. But when the tax cuts changes were announced, polls showed people thought they were a good idea. The government was then accused of playing clever politics designed to maximise its chances in the Dunkley by-election, which will be held this Saturday.
These tax cuts are passed just 4 days before the Dunkley by-election. It seems handy. Is that just coincidence or timing?
Well, we hope to get a good result in the Dunkley by-election, and everyone in Dunkley will know that we wanted every single taxpayer in Dunkley to get a tax cut.
Polls out this week have showed that while people like the tax cuts, they haven't done anything to boost the government's popularity, which has either stayed more or less where it was or gone slightly lower, depending on which poll you look at. So the narrative now is that the tax cuts have failed to boost the government's standing. In truth, the government was surprised they had generally been well accepted, so they were relieved their polling numbers hadn't gone really badly.
The extent to which they were ever likely to move the dial was limited, either in a positive sense or a negative sense in terms of breaking promises. What really needs to change for the government is the economy needs to improve, and inflation needs to come down, and cost of living needs to get under control.
The Coalition ended up backing the cuts despite its protests, and it hasn't been keen to make them a central part of its political attack in Parliament this week. that has instead focused on immigration and new fuel efficiency standards, known in coalition parlance as the family car and ute tax.
Why, during Labor's cost of living crisis, is the government proposing a tax increase of $15,000 on the price of a new Toyota Hilux?
But whatever the parliamentary theatrics, this week's polls have changed the perceptions about the government's fortunes and the expectations about this week's looming by-election. The sense that the government had moved ahead because of the tax cuts decision and that it would comfortably retain Dunkley has dissipated. The government is talking down its chances. The coalition is sounding more optimistic about the possibility that it will not only enjoy the traditional swing against the government of the day, but might even win the seat.
Oh, look, by-elections are difficult for governments. Historically, that's the case. We'll wait and see how Saturday turns out.
What Peter Dutton thinks is a little less clear. His last press conference was 6 days ago in suburban Sydney. He has asked just one question in the Parliament this week on immigration and hasn't campaigned in Dunkley since the coalition campaign launch 10 days ago.
So we get people to write down the first words that come to mind to describe the Australian economy, and it's words like struggling, challenging, downhill, difficult, unsustainable, concerning, scary, expensive, unsettled, daunting, stressful. They're pretty powerful words.